Shabbat Shalom for those of you who are joining us on YouTube. I wanted to just say that we have made it through a feast day season. We're coming to the end of the season of Shavuot. And I will explain that a little bit more in detail, documenting our diagramming our information on the board. But let me say that we have begun the season of repentance, or the season of Teshuvah, or what we call the 40 days of introspection. Now, there's a few very important elements concerning the month of Elul. But first, what I would like to do is talk a little bit about the depth of this that people really have not necessarily begun to grasp, okay? So there's a number of things that we've got to get through today to get to the point that we really need to kind of focus in for this season, okay? Because there's a theme attached to this part of this season. I'll explain that in a minute. So let's start at the beginning. The first thing that we need to do is we need to talk about of history, okay? So the concept of history has what we would call a factual and a mythical basis. Let me explain what I mean. I mean that there is an element of proof that things like the Bible are true, okay? And there's an element of faith required to get through that. In times past, when I have spoken to atheists or other agnostic who are still seeking their faith, okay? I say, look, I can take contradictions in the Bible. In fact, there's this beautiful website called The Skeptic's Bible. If you ever want to really, really get your head around how much faith you really need to have to believe in what you believe as a Christian, go read The Skeptic's Bible. But the premise is, I can destroy the logical arguments of the Bible being true through scientific, archaeological, anthropological, and contradictional proof. What do I mean contradictional? It contradicts itself. That is not some anomalous coincidence. It actually contradicts itself. If you don't accept the mythos, the faith side of it. Okay? So that's important because in history, we have a concept of documented, archived, authenticated history. For example, Josephus is an authenticator of Jewish history. But what is interesting is that Josephus, even in his works, quotes folklore of the Jewish people that is not in the 66 books of the Bible. Why is that so important? Well, because Josephus lived at a time when the oral traditions and folklore were beginning to become documented through the Talmud Mishnah period, right? The Mishnaic period. As a result of that, Josephus has oral tradition built into his process, or having what? Folklore built into his process. Now, when we talk about the existence of a people, a culture, spiritual things, there's an element of faith that we need to have. And why this is important is because if a people claims something, we need to give them the benefit of the doubt that it's true unless we can prove otherwise. And one of the things that the people of the Bible who claim to be the associated group of the people of the Hebrew Israelites who were brought out of the land of Egypt is that the month of Elul is the month of creation. The 6th month is the month of creation. Now, that becomes very important when we get into the idea of the 40 days of introspection and also the season of repentance. Remember, the number 40 has a very intriguing aspect to it. For those of you who have been here from early times, you will remember my teaching about the connection between the flood and the feast day season. How the flood is inside of the feast day season, starts in the 2nd month, ends in the 7th month, right? But inside of the feast day season is the 6th month. Now, the 7th month contains the most powerful, most esoteric, most misunderstood, and most amazing experiential feasts that you can encounter, or Moedim is what we should be calling them, appointed times, times that are designated by the sun, moon, and stars to occur every year in repetition of cycle. Those fall feasts, Yom Teruah, Feast of Trumpets, Yom Kippur, Day of Atonement, and Sukkot, Feast of Tabernacles, the 8th day, or Shemini Atzeret, is absolutely of heaven above and not earth below, of respondents, of communication from the intensification of all power in the universe downward towards us as a result of our communications during the season of Passover on through Shavuot, the season from Passover, or the season from Passover. Feast of Trumpets is about correspondence upward, crying out, making requests, asking for mercy. As we move into the season of Yom Teruah, we are going to move into a downward outpour that water ceremony, which is a belief that it has a connection to rain. Now, what's intriguing about the word rain, that more, and there's a yore. Okay, there's an early rain and a latter rain. And the latter rain is actually during the Pesach season, the Passover season. The early rain occurs in the during the fall feasts, and that early rain is more. Well, that word more doubles as the word teaching. So the season from Shavuot to Yom Teruah is a preparation for what's about to pursue us: learning, teaching, right? And look what happened last year. We rolled the scroll back on the day of the water ceremony. We rolled the scroll back. The scroll camera broke, so I can't show you the scroll. We roll the scroll back. We get to the other side of the feast day season, to the time in between Sukkot and Pesach, between Tabernacle and Passover. And what we have, revelation about why Hebrew parent root pictographic, a Hebrew pictographic parent root doesn't reflect anything to have to do with light, but means light, and basically means order. And we began to find out that the pictograph itself claims it is a strong mind or a strong head. And so all of a sudden, something strange occurs, because we start to get into this idea that there is a weak mind and a strong mind. And it's just been crazy information since then. Where the latter rains fell, the early rains fell, Now, why they call it the early and the latter rains? Well, there's something very important. You need to remember that the 6th month is the month of creation, according to folklore. Now, we can accept or reject that because we don't understand and we are intrigued to see that there is actually a possibility of not telling the truth. But functionally speaking, we have the first action of creation occurring towards the end of the month of Elul, next month. Now, why the 6th month? Why not the 1st month? Yahweh tell the people of Israel as they're coming coming out of Egypt during Passover, to this month is the beginning of the month for you in the month of Aviv. Aviv of what? The barley. The barley has to be green for its harvest. If it's not, then there's another month, right? We don't really ever know when the counting of the months is going to begin. Now, if we accept Hallel the Second's atonements that have to do with Yom Kippur and have to do with the Yovel or the Jubilee and have to do with the Shemitah, that's a different story because they're correspondence to that whole situation that have its place in understanding. However, early on in my walk with the Father in this process, he told me the feast days are in the eye of the beholder. Because the Sabbath was not, or man was not made for the Sabbath. We were not made for the feast days. The feast days were made for us. Which means what? We manifest the feast days. We are what causes it to come to life. We're the ones who set up the sukkah. We're the ones who wave the lulav. There are a number of things that we do to identify that they are ours. Therefore, us. We are not there to be a addition to them. That's not how it works. We create them and they come alive because of us. More on that later. Now, the reason why this is so important is because when we get into the rest of this message, you're going to understand that what you're going to learn today and the season of repentance and what is pursuing you during the season of repentance is all related to the difference between heaven and earth. So the difference between that correspondence and us in who we are. Okay? Okay. So let's start at the beginning. And when I say let's start at the beginning, we're going to have to basically go into Genesis. But before we do, I really want to kind of document this 40 days of introduction. So let's go ahead and let's get some things straight on the board. Let's go and kind of step into some diagramming of information. So at the beginning, first things that we need to talk about is, of course, this, right? Everybody remembers this process right here, right? So we have winter, right? We have spring, we have summer, and we have fall, right? That's that premise. This is also northeast, southwest, and all kinds of esoteric stuff attached to that in terms of not only the name of those directions, very important, but the philosophy, which we'll also get into in a minute. So now the next thing that we need to talk about is the correspondence. When I say correspondence, what I mean is that, and let me explain that for a second. When I'm talking about correspondence, what I mean is the communication from the intensification of all power in the universe, information that we can't handle, down to information we can handle, to understand the information we can't handle. I'm sure that made a lot of sense. So let me see if I can word it a different way. What you don't know is actually right in front of you because of what you know. And Paul said that the ones who suppress the truth, what is the truth? Torah. Ones who say Torah does not apply to us are wicked, and the wrath of God is poured out from where? Heaven. We can talk about that sometime, but you need to think about it. God doesn't actually have emotions. So you figure out what wrath actually is. So the premise is that as the wrath of God is poured on those who suppress the truth, it says they are without excuse. Why? Because everything that has been made teaches us or shows us or bears witness of the fact that there are invisible attributes of God. That's the emanation of the Sifra. That's the actual transition of balance and of actionable attributes of the intensification of all power in the universe as they move down through the concentric contractions to this realm. They are being brought into existence through what we would call emanation, which is that there's a source where energy cannot be can neither be created nor destroyed, which means what? There's always been a source of energy, and that source of energy just transitions into all these different things. And as it transitions into all these different things, it is never destroyed. There is always some sort of energy present, right? That's the second law of thermodynamics. So maybe it's the first law. And the point being is that in all of that, you need to understand that there's an ongoing, never-ending flow of energy from above to below. And that is in the form of information as well, because all information is energy that we interpreted into intelligible construct. We use our imagination to what? A frame of reference. Now, the reason why that's so important is because when we're working with this diagram, which you guys have seen over and over, you guys know this is like Israel, you know what can happen, right? You know that they have this time of repentance and death to self, which results in an obedience, results in an abundance, which results in fatness, results in forgetting about who the fatness came from, and creating their own gods, but also believing that that may not be where it came from because they believe that they somehow are the ones who created that. Then what? Moving into infestation and stepping towards the direction of obedience. Infestation, if it is not eradicated, is given an opportunity to grow. And when it grows, it takes over and begins to oppress. And as it oppresses, now all of a sudden there's a point in time where the nation of Israel is given over as a possession. Remember, I sold my people without a price. That's a giveaway. Given over to the possession of the nation that's controlling them, that's actually demonic force. And therefore, there's a possession of a nation. Okay. And then there's a crying out. There's a Yeshua principle, which is what? Remember, destroyer watches and means to snatch out of the wolf's mouth violently, to beat the wolf over the head until his skull cracks and pull the sheep out of his mouth and destroy the wolf and then bring the sheep back to the flock. That's the Yeshua principle. That's salvation. Okay. And that moves us back into that point of repentance. I'm not going to draw all that on the board because I need some other things on the board. Remember, that's in Judges. they give up their right to the sovereignty of the power of the promised land in favor of going after other gods because there was a sensual element and there was myth of in it. Oh, our God will bless you more than your God. And not only that, but we get to go do this thing under the tree with the ladies, right? So Israel would go after other gods. Unfortunately, because there's a demonic presence running that nation, desire needs shedding, where we get the sick Christian paganized concept of there being a God who's insatiably lusting after blood that was so supposedly satisfied by Yeshua. One of the worst accusations that was ever made by a theologian, consequently, Augustine. And so, in principle, as we work through all of these things, there's a moment in time where we arrive at these seasons. Let me show you. So the spring feasts correspond to what? In other words, they're connected to spring. Pesach, right? Hamotzi, unleavened bread. Okay. And Bikurim. And those all have to do with the wedding step of what? Of she do king, or the shadchan, the matchmaker, the choosing of the bride, right? So we have Passover, we have unleavened bread, and we have first fruits corresponding to the Shidduchin, okay? Or the choosing of the bride. Now, what's summer? Summer is Shah, the Feast of Weeks. Right? And in between here, you have what? Omer. Right? Okay. And that corresponds to what? The barley harvest. Okay. I did not spell that right. I believe that's how I spelled it. Barley harvest. And this corresponds to what? The wheat harvest. All corresponding to harvests, right? Okay. Then as we move into this section here, from summer to fall, we have this, or kind of a halfway point in between Shavuot and Yom Teruah. And then we have Yom Kippur. And then Sukkot. We have Shemini Atzeret. Okay. Shemini Atzeret, Sukkot, Yom Kippur, Yom Teruah is what we're moving towards. But we know that that's actually not true. It's pursuing us. We are not moving towards it because the future doesn't exist. Let me explain that to you. Yeshua said, tomorrow, that's promised. Let's talk a minute about that. Let's talk a minute about that. So after flood, which bottlenecks humanity down to 8 souls in consideration. We know we've done a few midrashes where we think there's probably more people on the ark, which would kind of correspond more to the folklore of the ark. However, in principle, 8 souls, right, end up coming through and creating the new generations of humanity. And what do we know about that? After the flood, a rainbow gets put in the sky, a promise that seed time and harvest, winter and summer, or heat and cold, would what? Continue as long as the earth, as long as the Aretz remained. Okay? And as that occurs, it seems as though then we are promised tomorrow. However, Yeshua says tomorrow is not promised to you. So don't think that way, right? He says what? Live in the moment. Be in the moment of your actions. Now, realistically, he also understood, because Jews are businessmen. Listen, when you are 4 years old, you begin to learn the Hebrew language. When you are 8 years old, you begin to learn Torah. When you are 12 years old, you become a bar mitzvah, or a bar mitzvah, which is what? It's a son of commandment, right? It is someone who is able to execute Torah, alive, accountable to it, and responsible as a man, and who can midrash in the temple service, who can go to the synagogue, hear somebody speak an opinion, and give their opinion back. Anybody under that, who's 12, to go to the temple and put the heads of the rabbis. So the reason why that's important is when we're working with this thought process of the correspondence. Rabbis would go into the city. The rabbis called Magid. Okay, Magid is the rabbis who travel to find students, to bring them back to Jerusalem to sit under the chief rabbi. Okay, or they would students if they're more esoteric, Shimon Bar Yochai, people like that, who are more esoteric group of people, have their own little groups, like Yeshua. Okay, they wouldn't necessarily go sit with the rabbi in Jerusalem. The point is that a rabbi would come through town, and they would go and they would talk to the children who were over the age of 12, between the age of 12 and 15, and they would test them. And if they gave good questions, remember, Yeshua gave answers and questions. If they gave good answers and good questions, and a rabbinical student, and they would have their mother and father and leave the family business, the responsibilities of that life, and follow that rabbi. Okay. However, if they were tested and told that or if they were tested, then, and they were not able to give good questions or answers, the rabbi determined that they would not make a good student, learn the family business. Every single family had business. Okay? That's important. Jewish people in general, businessmen. Every single family operates within the confines of business. People tradition, people who begin to move away from Torah, the people away from Shabbat, they don't own businesses. But the traditional Jews all own businesses. Some of them may be in a more of a, that business isn't profitable. Maybe they take an extra job or whatever. So I'm not trying to make it static. But what I'm trying to say is that business plays a role here. Well, one of the reasons why that's important is obviously but I want you to understand that a moment. Okay. Looks like it got fixed. Hopefully that doesn't change the picture. Okay, so the premise is basically when we are working with the feast days, these harvests, we are corresponding with that process of reaping and sowing. Okay. Now, the reason why this is important is because all correspondence is just connection. So on earth as it is in heaven, okay, is connection to information. Remember, information is just energy that we converted into a construct of information. Okay, that's it. So the intensification of all power in the universe goes, and we go, oh yeah, that's a good idea. Okay, we construct it with our imagination. I'll explain that more later. But maybe not during this service. But let's get back to our let's get back to our. So the premise is that nothing that occurs with all of this information is going to come from the Shavuot, which is what? That is known as the oops, I did that backwards. Erusin. The Erusin is the betrothal. Okay. The Erusin is the betrothal. And one of the most important things that you need to know about that is betrothal is marriage without the okay, and I will explain or more, but the concept that I get is that everything that pertains to the commitment to marriage is contained within the subject of Irusin. Everything that pertains to the consummation and ratification of the ketubah and ratification of the covenant corresponds to the time spent with the bride in the tent in privacy and intimacy. You get my point? Okay, so Yeshua says tomorrow's not promised, right? And so the premise is that he understood because they have the business, right? They have business. And so when he would say, oh, we're going to go conduct business in this city on this day, he said, don't say that. That we also have so we're trying to communicate. Now, there are people who take issue so but what he was trying to communicate, what the spirit of what he said, live in the moment, okay? Because in that something is happening, and that's going to be very important. Because what people don't understand about thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven has nothing to do with some crazy sovereign determinism that is us from the existence of process. We just kind of sit idly by and wait for the next thing to happen because that's the will of God. That's not how it works. We literally create the feast days. Yahweh doesn't set up the Sukkot. He instructs us to set up the Sukkah. When we set up the Sukkah, or we set up more Sukkah, we set up Sukkot, we are actually creating the feast day. When we cook the lamb, set out the horseradish and the charoset and the other things, and we do the erchats, we are creating the feast day. That's so because he never wanted to sit on the sidelines and watch the football game. He wanted us to be the quarterback, and he wants us to call the shots. He wants us to do the creating. And what's interesting is he's the coach, right? We're going to the plays, but what we get on the field and call the audibles. That's life fire down from heaven. I don't think that was quite written into the plan. I think that was Elijah in the way he was acting. Because when the final general comes up to him, he's like, please, chill. We just want to come talk to the guy. I'm trying to kill you. And I have a family at home. I'll just walk away. But if you don't mind, come with me. Because if they find out that I defected, they're going to come find me and kill me. So could you just chill with the fire for a minute? Come down the mountain. Be okay, right? It'll be okay. I was like, okay, yeah, my bad. And so what? The first two were like, get down here, we'll kill you. And that's so the point being, there is an adaptation to our decisions at a part of the plan. Okay. So why is that so important? Because when we start to get into the depth of this thing that we're going to understand here in a minute, it's going to be important. So now let's go from the Shavuot or Edessin to, let's get back to it. Okay. So we go from Shavuot, right, which is going to be the only feast day corresponding to the summer season, which has to do with maturity. The bride is ready to accept the covenant. Was Israel prepared to accept the covenant when they came out of Egypt? No. They had to go through something first and mature and overcome it. So now we start to move from the summer into the fall feasts, okay? Now the history comes in the form of the fact that these feasts correspond to the fall season, the 7th month, okay? But that also corresponds to the end of the flood. Now, if you recall, it rained for 40 days and 40 nights. And what you need to know about that is the flood continued long after that into what? 20 days, which we figured out in that one teaching, starts in the spring feasts or starts in the Passover season and ends in the Sukkot season. And what we also understood is that there was a 40 at the beginning, which was what? That was the flood, rains falling. That was Yeshua's days on earth after resurrection before ascension. That's the first 40 days of the counting of the Omer, etc., etc., etc. And then we figured out that there's 40 days at the end. So there's a 40 here and there's a 40 here. Okay. But the 40 at the end have to do with Yom Kippur. So that's the next thing that we need to cover and talk about. It is very, very important that you understand that the fall feasts correspond with what's known as the Nezusim. Let me go ahead and put that up there real quick. The fall feasts correspond to the Nezusim, which is the consummation of the covenant, the ratification of the covenant. Okay? The principle or the point behind this has to do with Shavuot. So Moses goes up on the mountain for 40 days and 40 nights. The people build the golden calf here. Then he goes back up on the mountain for 40 days and 40 nights. And then what? Blood is thrown on the people, sprinkled on the people, and there is a commitment to the covenant. Okay? So the principle is that right here was a violation of what? Of the Irusin, or the betrothal, when they build the golden calf. Let me label that so that we're not misunderstood about time points here, okay? Now, in between the time of the golden calf and the beginning of the 40 days of introspection is something called the straits. It's about a 3-week period from the 9th of Av to the beginning of the 40 days of introspection. Now, let me talk to you a minute about the 40 days of introspection. When Jews enter the moment of the 9th of Av, they go and they sit Shiva. They actually sit in a state of mourning as if someone had died. To what? The fact that the Holocaust, the destruction of the temple, the Roman occupation of Jerusalem, etc., all happens on the 9th of Av, corresponding to the calf, because according to the Jewish folklore, Yahweh wants the people of Israel to weep about the fact that, and so for the rest of existence, mourn that they constructed that golden calf so that they would never do it again. Okay. Now, the next thing that we need to do is we need to talk about the ebb and flow, right? I mean, that's a big important part of this process. So let's go back over here and let's just do our diagram. You guys know it well. You guys know I like to do the dot green, right? And then I like to do a red and blue for our season, etc. And let's document this. Oh, this is Passover, Pesach. Why did you write Hebrew words on the one page? Why are you writing the English words on the other? You got to give some of the people who don't understand Hebrew a break. Pentecost, right? And then it's tabernacles. Why am I putting only these 3 on the board? Why is it? Why am I putting only these 3 on the board? The reason that I am is because basically what is going on is these are what are known as the prescribed feasts. These are the 3 feasts where it was required that a man show his face in the place where Yahweh would put his name, which David designated as Jerusalem, but that doesn't necessarily mean anything, but that Yahweh would put his name there, right? That's the important part, is that David said, hey, could you put your name here? And Yahweh, where the temple was built, that's where the fire came down from heaven, the sacrifice on the altar to demonstrate that he approved of it. The glory of the Lord filled the temple when Isaiah was there, etc. We could get into the folklore of all the miracles that occurred right before the temple was destroyed, indicating that the temple was going to be destroyed, and how that corresponded to when Yeshua died. However, either way, every man had to show up in Jerusalem, show their face, and not show up empty-handed as a result of them saving 10% of their income for that feast day in order to what? Enjoy it. In order to consume it. It says you may eat the sacrifice in the place where I'll put my name. Okay, so we have Passover, Pentecost, and Tabernacles. But now what we have is we have this concept that there is a spiritual incline. The light of Passover goes out. There is a climax of it here, and it begins to diminish as it gets to the other feast day in order to what? To allow the second level of the wedding steps to be accomplished. The choosing of the bride is accented at this point here, and what? There is a diminishing of that as Pentecost comes into play, and then we have a decline in spiritual energy and in revelation, as it were. So there's this time where it's like, are we ever going to learn anything new? Are we ever going to find our way, right? But then what happens? Well, we also have the other side of this thing that's important because that is going to be the wilderness season and the golden calf season, an accentuation on the physical realm, not necessarily prosperity per se, right? But definitely an accentuation. And so I'm going to talk about these trends here that are very important. The downward trend, let's see, let's make them green. The downward trend from here, green, from here to here, okay, is about a highlighting or an accentuation of the hunger of the people. As you become more hungry, there is less spiritual desire. Whereas as you come out of Passover, right, when the Yeshua principle's been activated, you come out of Passover. As you come out of Passover, you are in a state of ecstasy, as it were, spiritually. But what's happening? You're in the wilderness season, which is a lack and decrease, a reaping of what you've sown, right? There's kind of it's almost like this area here is saved for you to reap the stuff that you've sown. Whereas here it appears that this is more about you getting fat on what you've reaped. Too. Okay, so the concept of that is that this upward swing from the wilderness season, let's go ahead and write this down here. The wilderness season to the golden calf has to do with the hunger that occurs here, the balance that occurs here, and then the overeating that occurs here. Now, what's interesting is if you look at the trends in the world, if there's this fatness occurs during the winter season when there's not as much activity and there's kind of a breakdown in exercise routine, people to go out to exercise or whatever the reasons. And we could factor in the holidays, which would be a whole nother level of for lack of words, pagan pagan indulgence. Okay, but we'll leave that alone. We're not gonna mess with that. And there's this decline, and I don't know if you guys have felt it or not, but there's this decline in physical energy. There's this decline in physical motivation. There's this decline in happiness, et cetera, et cetera. But there's this strange overtone, which I should say is an undertone, strange undertone of some sort of spiritual awakening that seems to be pursuing you. Like you can't necessarily get away from it. You can't shake it. You don't know what it is, but you can't shake it. Okay. So we could talk a whole lot about it, but the point I want to make is that right now, at this moment, we are in the 6th month in what we would call the season. That is not the color I wanted to use. We are in the season of penance. We built the golden calf. We feel guilty about it. We need some sort of reconciliation to that, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. Now, I didn't build the golden calf. Well, you know what? Leave it alone. Believe that that's true, and you don't believe that you had somehow stepped into fatness in such a way that even things that were so pleasurable during the wilderness season, even the things that were so desirable during the wilderness season, loathsome to you, then you know what? That's between you and the Father. Okay? Generally speaking, the nation of Israel, who's that? Those who were grafted into or adopted and those that have bloodline connection through the what? Yeshua principle of salvation, who name the name of Christ, we'll call it, who are connected to the root, who are connected to the vine, will build the golden calf. Simple as that. Okay. Now, having said that, it's very important that as we go through this, you understand that this is not static, it's dynamic. Let me explain the difference between static and dynamic. So when we build a building structure, let's say that we just do something really simple, like a rectangle and maybe some windows, okay? Couple floors. Technically speaking, sure, unless we go down to the quantum level, is stuck in a state of what we call stasis, or what we would call static. Okay? That means that you can put a plant on the shelf and tomorrow it's still going to be on the shelf if tomorrow comes. Okay? So that fact we'll make it static. We'll say it's static enough that we can actually put a plant in the windowsill and it's going to stay there because it is growing, right? And it is not going to move because this is a static structure. Static structure. Okay. Now, along comes a track hoe. You guys are gonna love my track hoe. Right? Along comes a track hoe. Now, what do we know about it? We know that the concept behind this is all of the loads are going to be what? They're going to be passing from this point to this point to this point to this point into the ground. And there's a grounding to it. That structure results in a straight line from one end to the other without any change, and that load will always be bearing, okay? Whereas with the track hoe, it will have to move at a distance in order to have a load pressing down on it, which means no matter where it's at, whether the bucket is down here or the bucket is up here, the load is still being borne by the track hoe. In other words, it counterbalances, which is usually the motor in the back, which is creating a force that counterbalances the load that it can handle that's inside here. And it has to be able to still be that way when it's, which means there's a lot of engineering concept, but you need to realize that the load is being distributed as it moves at different points. That's why you see this kind of structure, you see a trapezoid, because it's kind of a bunch of triangles supporting it, okay? Now, why is this so important? Because nothing that pertains to you, life, or the information that I'm giving you is a straight line load of information that you can bear. You're going to have to flex like this track hoe right here. This is called a dynamic structure. Dynamic. And when I say during a sermon, this thing is dynamic or it's not static, what is that saying? That is saying that it needs to be able to what? Flex. To flex with the load that's being applied. So let's talk about this for a minute. That means that you may see a lot of physical prosperity or whatever in this moment, okay? You may reap some decent benefits during that time. And I'll tell you why. Your proper response to the wilderness is to what? To persevere. When we are persevering, when we are hungry, remember, it is not a satisfied people who goes after other gods. it's not hungry people that go after other gods. Let's talk about that for a minute. The only time that you're going to move towards and consume it with the intention of consuming it in order to be satisfied is when you're hungry. So if you that as that's when you're going to pursue God the most, and I know I'm using the word here. We've got Christians. When you pursue God the most is going to be during the wilderness season. Listen, they didn't cry out to God when they're at the seven palms. They didn't cry out to God when they were enjoying food and water. They cried out to God when they were hungry, thirsty, and were being attacked by Abimelech or by Amalek. Well, now we get to the golden calf season, and what? They've got the man water, they've got protection, they've got the pillar of cloud, they've got the whole mountain on fire. God's kicking in with them. Moses goes up into the fire. They don't know whether he's alive or dead, but they say, "Oh, you know what? We're okay. We're gonna persevere." They forget the fact that he's coming down from heaven from Yahweh, and they say, "We're going to create a God to lead us to the promised land." We don't know where he went. It is not a hungry people who goes after other gods. Okay, so because of that fact, very important to understand that the hunger causes obedience. Well, that corresponds to spring to summer. Remember, that's still within the confines of this half right here, which is what? This half, I don't want it to be purple. Let's see. Let's do a thick line here of green. Okay. And on this side, we'll use dark green to represent O. We'll represent obedience. O-B-D-ence. Right? And on this side, we will represent disobedience. And on this side, we will represent what? We will represent hunger. We will represent satisfaction. We will represent fatness. And we will represent decrease. They have to diminish in order to become hungry again, right? That's the principle there. Okay, let me show that this way real quick. Explain what I'm talking about. Decrease is not hunger, but it's an increase in hunger. You're starting to become hungry again. Hunger is a longing. That longing that occurs there, then what? Activates the satisfaction. Satisfaction's been pursuing the hungry, right? Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. They will be filled. But fatness is what? Where we need to be very, very, very careful, because we need to remember that we were satisfied. We need to remember our hunger, and we probably need to remember our decrease. After fatness occurs and we start to what? Lose that fatness, and we start to not be satisfied anymore. As that occurs, we start to become hungry again, and there we have the full cycle. Now, why is it important? Because the golden calf occurs in the season of fatness. The golden calf occurs in the season of fatness. So, it is very important to understand that the golden creates shame. And I'm going to explain that in a minute, because a lot of people don't understand shame. So let's actually, not in a minute. Let's explain it right now. Shame is activated as a result of guilt that is sorrow, right? What is guilt? Well, guilt is defined as a painful emotion that occurs as a result of a perception or actual identification of a wrong. A wrong is a result of an awakening of the conscience. What? Understanding of your conscience accusing you or defending you in the day of judgment. That's Yom Kippur. Why? That's been written on the heart of Adam. Remember, in Hosea, in Hosea 11, chapter 11, it says that there is so there's a statement that says that Adam violated Yahweh's covenant. How? Written on the heart. Why? Because when Yeshua ratified the new covenant, he did it at the foundations of the earth, because he is what? The lamb slain from the foundations of the earth. Remember that John identified him as the lamb who would take away the sins of the world. He did that all the way back to Adam. So Adam has what? The new covenant written upon his heart. Yep. The only way for Adam to have been righteous was made him who did not sin to become sin for us, so he might become the righteousness of God. Why? Because just God would be a God who subjects the world to the obligation of merit, which is what is claimed by Christianity, that the Jews, the Israelites, had to do things in order to be saved, right? And then good old Augustine and Calvinists and God, some of them reformed about how we cannot be told. Moses said, don't say that, which is in your Bible, in my Bible, in the Jews' Bible, and probably somewhere in the Quran, that says you can be obedient. You've got to be in a spiritual manner. You can't do it according. The ego only does it. It's juice, right? Okay. So the premise is half occurs during this season of fatness. It is not a hungry people that goes after other gods. The concept of consciousness is the result of Torah being written upon your heart and being suppressed, which causes the wrath of God, or seeing the correspondence from the intensification of all power in the universe in the form of energy becomes a construct in our imagination so that we understand the instruction and don't suppress it. And it teaches us the invisible attributes of God, which is what? The emanation of God and what? The divine nature. Well, that should be interesting. And what? The which we'll get into a little bit later. Okay, why is all this important? Because of the sixth day being the of creation. Of creation is the month in which we are sorrowful for our construction of the golden calf. What happened after the golden calf? What happened? Yahweh said, you want to walk with me? Take off your jewelry and your robes and start acting like my people instead of Egypt's people. Because I don't like your sadness. I like your obedience to my force of benefit that I'm trying to give you. Torah. Social justice. I don't want you seeing your children to me or to anyone else. So don't worship me the way that the nations worship their gods, by painting eggs and having the children go look for the egg. And the one that finds the egg is the one who what? Gets put on the altar, who's the universal of the sacrifice. That's right. He started with he doesn't want us to do in the winter. Premise, we work through this. We understand that social justice and the promise of prosperity, not the tail. That means your business dealings always have you being supported on the other side. If you're not, then there's some correspondence that you need to understand where there is a attracting like kind to whatever your false business deals have been. Okay? That's important. Now, is it, yes, of course. Remember, I didn't say that here. I said that there is a flexibility on all of this. For tomorrow, he wasn't expecting you to not conduct business in such a way to schedule things. There always has to be, right? Just on the fly, somebody show up, because what if 5 people show up? You could go first. How much business are you going to lose? You schedule things out. He says, take no thought for tomorrow in the sense of what you shall eat, what you will drink, and what you will wear, because all of those things are provided. And the heathen, which is what? The non-Israelite people, those who have not been grafted in, born, and who have received of renewed in their process, worry about these things. But you don't have to worry about these things, because your Father, all good things come down from the Father of lights. Things work together for those who are called according to what? His purpose. Love him, right? Determine we can reject calling. And it says, without faith is impossible to please God. One, believe that God exists, but what's the second one? That he's a rewarder of those who diligently seek him. There's duh. Okay. All of that to now what? Put a magnifying glass on this. That is where we're at right now. So let's zoom to that thought process. Okay. So what we think about this is these 40 days of introspection are not what you think. The golden calf creates sorrow because of a violation of conscience, which is a what? As to whether or not we are accepting or rejecting the force of benefit that is known as Torah. Okay? It is a force of benefit, social justice, and prosperity. You are obedient to, you will experience those things. Attract to yourself, and protections will be removed. Let's talk about that just it is important for you to understand when you're getting into Torah, you don't immediately step into this realm where you are in a state of disreputation with God. That is him who knew to become sin for us, that we might become the righteous one. Our designation is right with our violation of Torah or obedience. As to do with in our life, or the force of lack and decrease in our life. 15 verses of Deuteronomy 20 of the benefit of the next verses, all the way to verse 6, I believe, are about what happens if you disobey. But it says these things will pursue you. But what's important for you to know is the reason why it's so dangerous is because when you are disobedient, you have rejected covenant, and therefore you have rejected the protection of the greater. We're going to get into the greater and lesser here in a minute. Now, the reason why all of these things are so important is because of what the season of repentance corresponds to. So, let's do this. Let's go back to the board. And what we're going to do is we're going to zoom in on that one spot. So all I'm going to do is I'm just going to create, let's do it this way. Let's go one dot here. Okay. And one dot here. And what you need to know is that this is not tabernacles. This is Yom Kippur. Okay. So let me go ahead and label that so that we know it is Yom Kippur. Okay. Or the Day of Covering. We'll get into that in a minute. And then this is Shavuot. Okay. Now we can draw our two ebbs and flows. We can draw our spiritual ebb and flow, and we can draw our physical ebb and flow. Okay? And we can identify that this point, right, is golden pattern. Okay. And we can identify that this point right here is the season of repentance. In fact, I'll put it here. This is Teshuvah. Now, what's important? These last 10 days right here, okay, are called the 10 days of awe. Why? Because during those 10 days, the book of works, okay, during those 10 days, the book of works is open. Now, let's talk a minute about that. The book of works is everything you've done since last Yom Kippur. Everything that you've sown. It is now being determined what you will reap. Talk a minute about our reaping. And remember, we have what? The one tooth for a tooth. You drop a peach pit into the ground. Up comes a tree full of peaches. You only have to eat one peach. What you sowed to the flesh, you reap. One unit of corruption for 1 unit of flesh. In other words, non-ego, intuition, obedient, flowing of the power of Elohim within you through a corresponding positive movement towards the same goal, creating the magnetism, drawing near to God. We're going to get into that in a minute. We need to understand that all of that is going to correspond to the principle of reaping and sowing the way that you attract yourself. Malevolence, attract malevolence. That's going to be ego. That's going to be fear. That's going to be reactions because of wounds. That's going to be outbursts of emotional energies that create wounds in other people. That's going to be beliefs and inheritance and micro adjustments to beliefs. And that's going to be the sickness of entitlement. The sickness of entitlement. Okay. All of those things correspond to the malevolence that you attract. And we have what? The intuition and the pouring out and the receiving, which I'll explain in a minute, that occurs in the vessel of honor or obedience. Okay? But the difference is, you drop a peach fit in the ground, out comes a tree, and you get to eat fruit on that tree with a limitation, and also a limitation to created some disobedience, and so some of that has to turn into lack and decrease. Is that general way that it's going to work? Remember, this is not static. This is dynamic. The loads change. The factors change. All of the energies change and alter and move in ways that I don't quite understand yet. You understand that there are some promises involved, actions involved, and there's some choices involved. Okay, cause and effect. Now, why is that so important? Well, because Teshuvah appears to be the season in which saw fairly completely true. And I will give you an understanding or an explanation of that in a minute. But what I want to get your mind into is an understanding that this is main section by which Yom Teruah is pursuing you. Okay, so let's explain a minute about what's happening. Let's talk about, because that responds to the 10 days of awe. And let's talk about, and talking about block logic here, 10 corresponds to 10. Just leave it alone. Don't try to make the connection. 10 corresponds to 10, so it has something to do with the 10 days of awe. Actually has to do with the 10 days of awe. Well, it has to do with what happened before you woke up, right? So what you need to understand is the 10 virgins corresponds to the entrance into the chamber, as it were. We'll explain that in a minute. Concept is that what people don't realize, they say, oh yeah, they fell, the 5 fell asleep, the others stayed awake, and they trimmed their way. That's, everyone fell asleep. I want to know why July you loathe the thing that you enjoyed in the beginning. You want to know why you have the action of creating the golden place? Because this timeline sleep. Corresponds to the shadow of death, sleep. Okay. Now, what's happening here? In the season after the golden calf. So there's a smaller season and the bigger season of the betrothal. What's the betrothal? The betrothal is the section in which the bride accepts the covenant and the husband goes and prepares a place for his bride. And until his father approves of his maturity, he can't go get his bride. Once he's prepared a place, everything's ready to go, and the father says, okay, go get your bride. And there's a big procession, and something happens. A trumpet is blown. Okay? A trumpet, a shofar is blown, and that corresponds with Yom Teruah. Now, what's interesting is this is what? Not tekiah. This isn't the do-do. This is the do-do-do-do-do-do-do-do-do-do. This is the alarm, right? Blow the alarm in Jerusalem. Sound it on the holy mountain. Why? To awaken the bride. So we take this right here. We'll bring it over here. And we will draw it right here as a straight line. This point, let's see, let's do it this way. This point right here is the 10 days of awe. This point begins the 30 days. This whole thing corresponds to the 40 days of introspection. Okay, 40 days of introspection. But what people don't realize is what is introspection. That's going to become important here in a minute. Now, why is all this so important? Because this is the season we're in right now. This is what you need to start applying to your life. Okay. All right. Now we get into something important. All right, so let me explain some things. Yeshua says, take no thought for tomorrow, what you will eat, what you will drink, what you will wear. This is what the heathen do. They worry about these things, but you don't. Don't you worry about these things. Who's he talking to? He's talking to the Jews who were on the Sermon on the Mount with him, who did not believe he was the Messiah. They walk away saying, this guy's different, but they don't say he's the Messiah, right? They didn't believe. So he's teaching this to them. Well, why? Because what they've been given versus what they're supposed to have are two different interpretations of the Torah. Remember, David was able to conclude from the 5 books, the story of Joshua, the story of the judges, and his stories from his grandmother Ruth, who Yeshua was, and what his purpose was, and what the action of Yeshua is. He made him who knew no sin to become sin for us, that we might become the righteousness of God. But his name means destroyer watches. What destroyer? The one who is waiting for the wolf to snatch up the sheep so he can break his skull. The one who's going to violently snatch his sheep out of the wolf's mouth. Don't get that twisted with rapture either. Premise is that the Yeshua principle will rescue the sheep from the wolf, okay? Violently, in a destructive manner, a manner that you can't understand because you're so caught up in the name Jesus, you don't realize what a Yeshua is. Okay, now the function of this starts to come into play as we talk about what he says then. He says, but seek ye first the kingdom of heaven and all of its righteousness, and all of these things shall be added to you. Okay, there's a lot in that verse. And I can tell you, it doesn't say kingdom of heaven. It says the rulership of heaven. Seek ye the rulership of heaven. But then he takes it a step further, another principle and another discussion with his disciples. And he says what? The kingdom of heaven is within you. Don't say that it started over here or over there. It's not Sistine Chapel. It's not in Jerusalem during Suleiman's raid of Jerusalem. It's not the kingdom of heaven. It's within you. Seek ye first the rulership of heaven within yourself. You see, if we just had the Sermon on the Mount, that's just one piece. But if we take the teachings of the kingdom of heaven from every parable, we understand that it all corresponds to something within us. Now, during the 50 days of counting of Omer, we examine the invisible attributes. Remember Romans chapter 1, verse 19, the invisible, or maybe it's 20, the visible attributes of God, the divine nature, and the eternal power are seen through that which has been made. Our learning has to come from what we see in front of us, right? And so the premise is that toward this, we need to understand all of the factors that are connected to this. We create the feast days, but you need to remember that they are corresponding to the steps of the wedding procession of God. The bride, who is Israel, throughout history, from the beginning, from Adam all the way to the end of the book of Revelation, is about Israel, the bride, a marriage, and a violation of covenant, and a divorce. A need for what? A need for a reconciliation. Enter Yeshua, right? But then we also need to understand the function. Our role, Adam is asked in the garden to name the animals. Did God get to pick the names of the animals? Well, there goes sovereignty out the window. Don't get me wrong. I believe in sovereignty and I honor sovereignty, but I understand also that correspondence plays a role where we are supposed to be a part of this process. That's why we raise the sukkah, not him. That's why we build the tabernacle, not him. That's why we bring the offering and consume it ourselves, because it is about us. If you could get your mind wrapped around that, it's about you. Everything is about you. All of creation is subject to you, right? All of creation is waiting for you to what? Wake up. Watch. Okay. So the premise is that the shofar is blown, the bride awakens, and she has 10 days to get everything figured out. There's correspondence to the 10 virgins, right? We need to learn something about Yom Kippur from the 10 virgins. There's one of two ways you're going to come into Yom Kippur. You're going to come in with it's what? It's a conscious choice that the next time that this happens, you come it. That's it. That's all it is. I'm not going to do that anymore. Doesn't mean you're gonna, because you still have to go through that temptation. You see, temptation, you've gone through it and overcome it this time. But the difference is that you don't have to eat the one-off. You don't have to eat each. You see, if you go into Yom Kippur like the 5 foolish versions, you go into Yom Kippur with the concept that when it comes around to the season, when you sowed that thing, you are what? You're going to reap judgment, lack and decrease, all the mess that goes with it. Until you get around to that where you cry out, that's a whole nother subject. Because guess what? Come around to the next Yom Kippur and they say, okay, he cried out. He wants to repent. Therefore, we have to tempt him again. Years. You get your bad choice 5 years ago. So why is that so important? Because of the fact that all of creation falls into judgment in these 10 days of awe. All books are open. And this examination occurs every year. Now, could we say then that revelation occurs every year? I'm not going to go there. But the premise is that everything that about your year is at this moment. So you're going to move from your introspection into the 10 days of awe or with a completion of what? Intention to overcome. And the cool part. Let's say that this year you chose to steal something. So next year it's determined that you need to be stolen from. Once you're stolen from, that's satisfied, and we go back to what? We'll go back to normal operation. We'll go back to temptation. Okay? But let's say that you repent. Repentance is an intention to overcome the next time that you're tempted. So you're going to be tempted and you overcome it. So now coming back again to the next year. So literally you commit the crime of stealing. You are determined that you're going to be stolen from, but you repent. Now it will be a temptation for you to steal again at that moment. When you overcome that, the next year, this is 3 years later, you actually reap the reward of overcoming, the prosperity, right? The complete opposite of lack and decrease. Now, what happened? I'm young, powerful. We are too humble. But I want to show you something, and that's going to be important here in a minute. The importance is going to come from the concept of the commandment of Yom Kippur. It's just so powerful. Leviticus chapter 23, looking at verse 27. Okay. On verse 27, let me go ahead and share this with you on the screen. In verse 27, we have also on the 10th day, 7th month, there shall be a day of atonement. Okay. That's a day of covering. We'll talk about that in a minute. It shall be a holy obligation unto you, and ye shall afflict your souls. Now, we have interpreted this as fasting, right? And we've interpreted this as fasting from Isaiah 58. However, we're going to go ahead and we're going to look at afflict. Okay? Afflict. To be occupied or to be busied with. From the root, to give an answer, respond, or testify, or speak about. Okay? Well, that's pretty weird. How does that correspond to fasting, right? How does that correspond to fasting? Now, what's intriguing about this is it actually says you will afflict your souls, nafshi, right? Or nafeshot, right? Nefesh, soul, self, life, right? To take a breath, to refresh oneself, right? But the principle of nefesh is the soul, right? In Genesis, let's just show you this real quick. In Genesis chapter 2, verse 7, Yahweh forms man out of the dust of the ground, breathes breath into his nostrils, and he becomes a nefesh, soul, chaim, life, a living soul. Okay? All right. So then what we need to glean from this is that in Leviticus chapter 23, verse 27, we are being told to give an answer. However, that Hebrew word means something other than answer because we fast, okay? But let's go ahead and let's take a look at this word in the ancient pictographic Hebrew. And I think this will be very important to your walk, your service and honor to the kingdom of heaven, to God, etc. Okay. All right, here we go. So I'm just going to put in this Strong's Concordance number into the digital copy of the Ancient Hebrew Lexicon of the Bible. And we should come up with our corresponding word. Okay. And what we're going to do is we're going to go over to the parent root. So the parent root, there's our PR, is ayin nun, and it means cloud. There's no action, right? There's no action. There's a question mark for the action, and it means affliction. So why does it mean affliction? There is an ayin and there is a nun. What's going on here? Why does this mean this? And why does cloud play a role, right? These are questions we need to ask. There's fasting through the idea of affliction, okay? And that's why we go ahead and we have the fast. But I want you to see this. Ayin nun nun, as in darkness. Isn't that intriguing? A cloud creates darkness, right? Cloud creates darkness. There is affliction, right? However, remember that word meant answer. So where's the answer? Right? Where do we find the answer in this? Well, the intrigue is in the correspondence between this idea of being afflicted, oppressed, to be occupied with, right? In other words, that your mind is connected with, but I want you to see right here, humble. Okay, so let's look at Strong's explanation here. He says it's from a primitive root, possibly rather identical with Strong's Concordance H6030. Well, Strong's Concordance H6030 is going to be answer, respond, or testify. Okay, so if we go to Strong's Concordance H6030, okay, so I'm gonna copy that. We were on Strong's Concordance H6031. We have an interesting concept as we go into this. And then we go to our parent root. Oh, what if we look at that? There is a whole other word. So what's going on here? Why is there a play on words? We got to kind of explain that into this, okay? So let's go ahead and go to the board and let's talk about what's happened here. So some of you may have already guessed by now, right? When we're dealing with the ayin, we have to check something. So there's the ayin and final noon, right? That's our corresponding parent root. However, in the ancient pictographic Hebrew, before the writing of Torah, so this is going to predate Moses writing things down, we are going to encounter what? We're going to encounter this pictograph and this pictograph, and we're going to encounter this pictograph and this pictograph. Why? Because the twist became the pictograph itself, but the name became the name of the letter. Ayin corresponds to I. That's the name of this letter, okay? But the drawing of the letter is going to correspond to the twisted rope. Now, here's the powerful part. One side says what? I and the seed sprout, right? So what is that? I continues. And has to do with answering. The other side has to do with what? Twisting. Continues. Now, if we look back at our word for evil, right? We have the chesh, ayin in the Torah, but we know that it's what? It's a human head. And what? The twisted rope, not the eye. Why? Because in the Psalm 23, it uses cheshayin, which means friend or man watches. But in this case, it means twisted head, which we know is what? Not a strong mind. That is the word for evil, evil in the English. So why is this so important? Because I continues means one thing, twisting continues means another. If we go in and correspond with our information, we will find that this specific parent root means to watch, answer, and the eye. Let's take a look at it here, okay? In abstract is to do business. Okay, so the whole idea is that pictograph ayin is a picture of an eye, the noon is a picture of a seed representing continuance. The combined these mean I continuance or I of continuance. The nomadic agriculturalist carefully watches over his livestock and crops by keeping a close eye on them. It was common to construct a shelter consisting of a roof on 4 posts as a shelter from the glare of the sun. Okay. While watching over something important, a straight furrow is made by carefully watching the direction of the ox. Let's keep going. A person, thing, or idea indicated or mentioned or understood from a situation of close watching. Close watching. okay? Or watching over something of importance. Then we have what? To keep vigil, to keep someone or something under close observation, to expect, okay? That's a non. Keep going. Business, a careful watching over a task or burden, and an answer or reply to a previous question or request as being watched for. That is very, very important. Why? Because that's our Hebrew word anah. Okay? Anah means to answer. Okay? Which means there's a question, and we're going to get to that. However, if we go back into our search and we just add that number 1 to our set for searching, all of a sudden it changes. All of a sudden, it is the word to afflict, in anguish, in the sense of making something dark. As a result, what? Clouds gathering and causing the sky to become dark. Storm clouds, right? And the pictograph is the same exact letters. What? The pictograph is actually going to be the twisted rope and the noon, and not the eyeball and the noon, but they are spelled the same in Torah. What does that mean? That means the word anah has a double side. Okay? So as we go into Yom Kippur, we humble ourselves, right? That makes sense, right? We bow low. That makes sense. But in that process, we give an answer, which means a question is being asked. So here's the intrigue. In order for there to be an answer, there has to be what? A humbling. Well, let's see if we can find that correspondence in the realm of the modern Christian scriptures, or what we call the New Testament, that Christians swear is the replacement for Torah. Okay? So let's go to James chapter 4. And before we go to James chapter 4, I'm just going to throw a small little tidbit question out to our Christians, brothers and sisters who claim they are Gentiles. Okay? James, the servant of God, and the Lord Jesus Christ, to whom the 12 tribes which are scattered abroad. What tribes? The tribes of Israel, right? The 12 tribes which are scattered abroad. Okay? First of all, at the beginning, the movement of the nation of Israel out of Egypt to the promised land, we have 12 tribes corresponding to 12 kings who are the original 12 representations of the nation of Israel, or the children of Israel, which is, of course, Naphtali, Asher, etc. So as there's the split between the northern and southern kingdoms, which to today, you can learn that on your own. The nation of Israel becomes the northern kingdom. The nation of Judah becomes the southern kingdom. The nation of Judah becomes the Jews. The nation of Israel becomes dispersed, scattered. Remember, the people at the tower and made a name for themselves so that they would not be scattered. Scattering is bad. Okay? So now Israel, which corresponds to divorce. The nation of Israel was divorced, right? The nation of Judah was preserved as a remnant to preserve Torah and also for the salvation to come from the Jews, right? The Yeshua principle be produced through the Jewish line because of the promise that Yahweh made to David. David has not made the choices that he made. Yahweh would not have made a covenant with him. Therefore, those promises, not only Jerusalem, but Yeshua would not have come from David. Now, we could get all weird and say, oh, there was sovereignty, blah, blah, blah. Okay, I will leave that alone. Okay, as I said earlier, his plan alters according to your choice. This whole thing is going to be about choice. I'm going to get to the premise. It says 12 tribes that are scattered. So my question to you, who claim that this is the New Testament and that the Old Testament is the suggestion and that the law's been done away with, what tribe are you? And if you are not of one of those 12 tribes, what are you doing reading this book? So for those of you who identify that you are actually, listen up. James chapter 4, starting in verse 7. Okay. It's submit yourselves therefore to God. Resist the devil and he will flee from you. We need to learn about submission, but we're not quite. Submit yourself to God. I think it's in actually the NLT. Let's take a look. Let's see if it still says submit. Humble yourselves before God and resist the devil and he will flee from you. Come close to God and he will wash your hands, you sinners. Purify your hearts, for your loyalty is divided between God and the world. Ooh, that sounds interesting. That sounds like the two sets of virgins, right? Let there be tears for what you have done. Oh, that sounds like repentance. Let there be sorrow and grief. Oh, that sounds like the season we're in. Let there be sadness instead of laughter and gloom instead of joy. Maybe that's why things have gotten so rough. Humble yourselves before the Lord, and he will lift you up into a place. We need to talk again about some things, but what I want to do is I want to bring in another factor. Okay? I'm going to bring in another factor, and that is going to be very important to this whole concept, this whole correspondence, because again, we're trying to understand how to walk out this season. And I apologize because this is going to continue for a little bit, so get comfortable. Okay, so first thing that we need to do is we need to acknowledge from all of this mess, the feast day season is about the marriage covenant with God. We create the out of obedience. As we decorate the sukkah ourselves, prepare the funky recipe, right? We create the feast days. Are we commanded to keep them? Yes, of course. Is our creation. He brings the animals to Adam. He doesn't name them. The words that we have for the animals correspond to how. And in the Hebrew, there's an indication that he didn't bring an animal, but an Adam spoke, and that animal became that thing. Adam for the purpose, which is a duck, a bat, or a beaver. Okay, so the premise is the way that we look at this, and the way that we got to get our concept or our idea wrapped around this is that we create the feast days. Why are we doing this? Because we are anticipating something as a corporate collective conscience. Last week, I taught about the false bride and how that corresponds to the principle of Babel, and that carried over to Revelation. But that also showed what the other bride was supposed to do, the frequencies and vibrations that would be vibrating at in order to demonstrate that she was the bride. It creates social justice and hopelessness. We're totally depraved and out to hell. It's not what Torah is, okay? Accusation to Yeshua. Well, Yeshua is the Word become flesh and dwelt among us. The Torah became flesh and tabernacled among us, which means what? He sat in a sukkah with us. He sat in a sukkah. Here's the part that's important, and this is the part that's very, very relevant, and that is it's all about marriage, but not how you think of marriage. Because we have screwed up that unless you have a certificate from the stating that you two have been joined together, and file taxes together, that you are married. But the truth is that does not correspond to the scripture itself and what is actually supposed to be happening. And I'm going to explain that in a moment. Now, the function of all this is based upon the masculine and feminine principle. And the way that I corresponds to the next. So what have we done? We've proven what the seasons are. Season from what? From Shavuot to Tabernacles, the bride is what? Asleep. Until Yom Kippur, in which she's awakened by the trumpet, in which she either had trimmed her wick or had preparation that seems to occur somewhere between the golden calf and Yom Teruah. Of course, Yom Kippur, which is the day of covering, which is the day you go under what? The chuppah, or you go become covered, right? You become covered by the, what is the marriage covenant? It's the sheet draping over the couple as they consummate. Okay. Now, the function of this is that concept of submission, because until now we haven't really understood submission because we've been too busy trying to what? To equality, gender equality, busy exploiting what we thought, and when I say exploiting, you men have been exploiting wives submitting to husbands. You don't understand. It said right in there that by doing that, they would win you without winning you to what? To teshuvah, repentance, because of order. Okay? And it says, husbands, dwell with your wives with understanding, as the wife being the weaker vessel, no, the lesser vessel. We'll get into that in a minute. The lesser vessel, which corresponds to what? If you don't, your prayers will be hindered. Okay? So exploitation, problem. Feminism, problem. Why do I say feminism? Because the idea to assert that a woman would be, or a feminine principle, authority or in the greater, messes up the natural order process of the masculine and feminine process. I'm going to show you this in a minute. It's going to blow you. Okay. So the first thing that we need to do is talk about man and woman. Okay. So we got to go to the board, and I'm sorry that we've had to go through all of this first, but time we've been seeing the cycle of Israel. We've been seeing the ebb and flow of the spiritual, physical. We've been seeing the feast day season. We've been seeing the season, the season. We've been seeing all these things, and we're missing a very important element of it all, which is 40 days of introspection, which I'm going to show you right now. Okay, so the premise, the first thing that we want to do is we want to look at the Hebrew words for man and woman. And they are like this. Ish. Okay. And I'm just going to put a breaker in here real quick. Ish and Ishah. Now, what's really important here is to understand that there is some connections, so there's some harmony and there's some dissonance, and we need to explain the difference between the two. So what's harmonious? Harmonious is we have two olives. I don't want to use that color. We have two olives coming down, okay? And we have two sheens coming down, okay? Now, here's the intrigue. This is the Hebrew word for fire, okay? This is Ish, okay? And so what is this? This is equality. Both the man and the woman have the fire, okay? However, purpose is a different story. And when you see this, this is going to shock you, okay? So the next principle is we need to correspond what is not harmonious. What is not harmonious is the yod there we go. So what is not harmonious is the yod, okay, and the hey. Now, for those of you who were here in 2021, you may remember some of this when I talked about the name of God, in that what? In that the yod and the hey are the short version of the name of God. But there's something else you need to know, and that is the vav hey are not contained within these the vav hey is not contained within these two words. Yoke is there's what? There's a part of Yahweh that has nothing to do with. However, there's a part of Yahweh that we are, and that corresponds to hey. In the ancient pictographic Hebrew, the yod is drawn. Okay. Okay. So, and the is drawn like this. Okay, it's a little bit off. Let's see if we can fix that. Now, you guys recall that this is the word behold. And this is the word do. What does that mean? That the disharmonious part of the man and woman is the difference between bearing witness to something and doing something. Okay. Now, we could get into the discussion about fire today, but we might lose our understanding of what's supposed to be going on during this time period. Why? Because it says, therefore shall a man, let's talk about this for a minute. There shall for a man leave his mother and father. Now, the intrigue is the woman does too, but she's not mentioned there. The reason for that is because the moment that the man leaves the mother and father, he becomes sovereign. Okay? Now, the concept of sovereignty is lost in the word in English. Well, we're moving towards something important here. So what we're going to do is take sovereignty in such a way to say that provision, protection, and instruction are non-negotiable when it comes to the wife's willingness to accept those things. Let's go with that. Now, moving to the other side of that, we have something going on, which is where the woman has a function or a purpose that is disharmonious with the man's function and purpose. Now, recall that a man is raised his whole entire life from childhood to what? How to treat a woman. What he's not taught is what to expect from one. A woman taught her entire life what to expect from a man. but she's never taught how to treat him. Okay. So because of that fact, you need to understand there is a disharmonious instinct within the paternal or the protective figure and the nurturing, the daughter, and paternal or protecting figure and in the training of raising son. Now, there's a few reasons why this is important. The first reason is because it means that there's a hidden, right? That means that there's an esoteric connection to what to expect from the woman. And there's an extra connection to what to treat the man, right? Here's the power behind it. You are given the answer. Give the answer. So here's how it works. Wives, submit to your husbands. Remember that word submit is doubled over as the word humble. Humble yourself before God, right? And he will raise you into a position of honor. The humility part is a function of elevation. But watch this. This is important. It is also a function of reception. Let me demonstrate to you again the simple process, or the simple process of knowing. Adam knew his wife and bore a son. Okay, here we go. This corresponds to we are led by our own lust. Lust, when it's conceived, is sin. Sin, when it is fully birthed, becomes death. Right? It also corresponds to reaping what we've sown. It also corresponds to our relational interaction with the intensification of all power in the universe. Remember, it's a force of benefit, right? So here's how it works. The concept or the idea of a conduit that will move an ideal into a state of existence is the concept of knowledge. Let me see if I can explain that a different way. A conduit moves a seed along its line into a womb of reception, and that creates a conception, which becomes a concept, becomes a knowledge. Okay? So here we go. What we are doing is we are having a vessel of inception. In other words, something that's going to plant the seed. And we have a vessel of reception. Now, this may appear a little graphic, but when the two come together, there is a correspondence. But now what? I have a vessel of reception and a vessel of reception. Does knowledge or correspondence exist? No. And therefore is destructive to the process. If there are a vessel of inception and a vessel of inception come together, does knowledge exist? No. There is a concept or an idea of failure because there's no womb. So on the one side, there's no conduit. On the other side, there's no womb. Okay? Now, that information corresponds to knowledge, but that information that's being passed down the conduit into the vessel of reception is actually to result in a concept, conception. Okay? Now, why is this so important? Because in order for there to be a humbling, there has to be an acceptance. So the humbling is the part where we accept that we are a vessel of reception. Now, that has two very important rules in it, okay? The first is that means that we give information, allegiance. We can't give any type of gift back to the greater vessel. The greater vessel corresponds to the conduit of conception. What does that mean? That means the lesser can never be the greater. But the lesser, in order to be in a state of reception, has to accept that position of that reception. Okay? Meaning one, that there needs to be an acceptance of position, of purpose, of responsibility to that principle. So if it's a masculine principle, the rules are clear. The feminine principle, the instructions are clear. So why does the husband need to dwell with the wife, right? With understanding that she's a weaker vessel? Because there's an understanding that's being clear that she needs to receive. Okay. Now, I'm sure there's some women are going, yeah, about there, I don't need that. Definitely not from him, right? Then on the other side, it's why submit to your husband themselves, right? Which is what? An acceptance of reception. Why is this so important? Because remember, right now the bride is asleep. Now, there's something you need to know about that. Sleep, also, and in the rabbinical times, corresponded to death, right? Look at that. We shall not all sleep. Right? And people have fallen asleep. The cup appropriately. The word sleep is the concept here. We shall not all sleep. So the premise is that what we really need to get our minds wrapped around is that sleep is a form of death. Okay. So the state of death that occurs is a result of the golden season, in which she grows what? Weary of waiting. Bring the point. Let's look at this really quick. During the point in which she's moving up towards the golden calf, she is asleep. However, she is not in a state to receive resurrection. She can't. Why? Because in her mind, she's saying, oh, this dude's taking forever. I don't know if I really want to wait for this guy. You know, this guy over here is kind of looking hot. He might be a better answer. Looks like he might have some more money. Maybe I made a mistake, right? The golden calf occurs, whatever that may be. I'm not going to get into that part. The golden calf occurs, and all of a sudden she steps into a state of shame. But what you need to realize about all of this is while she's asleep, she doesn't know who she is. She has no identity. Bride is not the bride until the bridegroom is with the bride. So what's important to understand is the bride does not know her identity. Remember the concept of being a willful vessel to a bound vessel, that's the betrothal, to a bride. Not the bride until the bridegroom comes. So she doesn't know that she's the bride. There's no knowledge because there's no inception, there's no reception, and there's no concept. Okay? And so the intrigue here is that she has to begin to learn or understand her identity. Now, here's the intrigue. Obedience is the bride's garments. It says in Revelation, let's rejoice, let's get together, let's be excited because the marriage supper of the Lamb, that's tabernacles, right? The marriage supper of the Lamb has come and his bride has made herself ready. When she's been awoken, right? She's been awoken and resurrected. She's awoken and resurrected, and now she is moving towards the Teshuvah. She's moving through the 10 days of awe, and then the 5 days of preparation for Sukkot, because at Sukkot is the marriage supper of the Lamb. Now, the reason why this is important is because what's supposed to be occurring during introspection is not this sadness and sorrow. It's a really easy fix. You say, oh, you know what? I stole that piece of candy from the store. My bad. I'm not going to do that again. Yom Kippur has reset. You'll be tempted next year. You overcome that. You'll have lots of candy bars. But the premise is that during introspection, the bride is in deep sorrow and regret because of her attitude leading up to the golden calf. The golden calf then becomes this thing, right, that becomes a wedge between her and the bridegroom, which causes her to continue in death. Guilt will cause you to continue in death. However, he made him who knew no sin to become sin for us, so we might become the righteousness of God, in order for there to not be a merit behind the bride's title. Okay? So the premise is now what's occurring. Now what we need to do is understand how this right here corresponds to that whole process. During the season of repentance, we set the intention, we're done. That part is done. You can spend 40 days feeling bad about what you did and hope that Yom Kippur does what it does, or you can get rid of that part and get into the introspection part, because the introspection part has to do with creation. And remember, we're supposed to be in a state of creation. So here's the crazy part about this. This is actually the time in which you can have the most correspondence with the kingdom of heaven. Seek ye first the kingdom of heaven. The kingdom of heaven is within you. Seek ye first the kingdom of heaven within you, which means there's something within you to seek. So what is it? Well, first of all, obviously, you need to accept that you're a vessel of what? Reception. How do we know that? You're not the intensification of all power in the universe. He's the actual only greater. However, he assigned greater to the masculine. If you have that plumbing, you are a greater. If you have the other plumbing, you are a lesser. Does that diminish your value? No, it does not. What it means is you're a vessel of reception, because it comes from a higher to a lower. What are you supposed to receive? Provision, protection, and instruction. From whom? From the Father. That's why he iconed himself as a father, even though that's just an energy, and that's just a variation of emanation. You need to understand, when I say I worship the Father, I pray to the Father, I blah, 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 I understand that's an energy that's going to be activated through my actions of creation. Okay? So in principle, the Father is just a potential that you start to manifest, so to speak. Now, I know manifestation is a scary word for you Christians, because you're terrified of the New Age movement. And yet you call your book the New Covenant, the New Testament. That's New Age. We'll get into that. Okay, so the premise and process here is you need to begin to accept position and then operate. So let's get back to this. We have the and the hay coming together. So let's think about this. A man and a woman, a man shall leave his mother, shall be joined to his wife. In the Hebrew, that is, he shall cleave to his wife. What does it mean? It means no matter what wedge of separation tries to pull them apart, he will stay glued to her. Okay? And then the two shall become one flesh, which is our inception, reception, conception. Okay? So the principle is, as a concept, that the joining has nothing to do with the state and has nothing to do with the approval of a preacher and has nothing to do with the process or the concept of the approval of the family. Should there be witnesses? On the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses, let everything be established. How many people are present when there is a man and a woman being joined together? 2. So who are the witnesses? The man and the woman. Now make the mistake. Do me a favor and make the mistake of joining together and not becoming man and wife. Because that is a whole other mess. Because of what you've done with her and have not stood up and become, you are not in a state of reception of your responsibilities, and you are not operating within the covenant. Do the same thing. Make your choice to allow inception, reception, and conception and not dwell or not submit to your husband. Right? Somewhere in there, we're going to have to get the idea that the way this works is they are joined together, which we could get into oxytocin, we can get into kinds of things, the bonding concept. And then we can get into the correspondence, which is what? The conception, the inception, reception, conception, which you know what I'm talking about. But then we need to understand the dwelling part. We need to understand that there needs to be what? A proper submission, and there needs to be a proper dwelling with understanding. Remember, men, your prayers are going to be hindered. But what I want you to think about is if you don't follow the action of receiving, thereby activating purpose, you're going to be in the same state. So let's talk about that. So men, on the one hand, Ish has the yod, right? Which is the do. It's an action. But what you need to understand, this happens in the realm of Asiya. The man needs to be the origin or the source of provision, protection, and instruction. Now, there are people who dwell on this earth who are not joined together, who are in operation of covenant with the intensification of all power in the universe, who have their process going on just with him. But the moment that the natural order process occurs of a man leaving his mother and father, joining to an Ishah, joining to his wife, and the two becoming one flesh, then we start to get into the man receives the instruction from Yahweh, and he gives that instruction to his wife. The wife no longer receives the instruction from Yahweh. Because that energy comes in, right, to the man's imagination creates the conflict on how to interpret that into an action that he needs to carry out with his family and obviously with his wife. His wife saying yes, okay, and moving in that direction with him is not sufficient. What comes next is the submission. She is not supposed to do. She is supposed to see and observe. And what that will activate is a witness. And on the mouth of 2 witnesses, that everything is established. But also please understand that a witness, what? Creates the existence. We learned that in the double slit experiment, right? When the observer sees the light, what he expects the light to do, and what he observes the light to do, thereby perceives the light to do, is what the light will do. But when the light is not observed, it is in a state of disorder. It doesn't follow the expected pattern. But when we expect it and observe it, it does exactly what we do. We can get into all kinds of what that actually means when it comes to the human creation. We talk about vibrations, we can talk about manifestation. But what I want to talk about is how we are actually drawing near to God. Going back to James, and then we'll wrap this up. Going back to James, humble yourself before the Lord, and he will lift you up into a place of honor. But I want you to look here. Humble yourselves before God, resist the devil, and he will flee from you. Do you know what that word devil in the Greek is? Diabolos is actually the idea of basically creating sorrow, accusation, the accuser. Okay? So if the principle is that you are supposed to resist the accuser, I want you to think about who is the accuser. The accuser is the one who's identifying that you are guilty. So who identifies that you're guilty? You. And so what you need to overcome is the limiting belief that either A, you can somehow earn it, or B, that you can somehow get rid of it just because you don't want to deal with it. What I mean by that, he made him who knew no sin to become sin for us, that we might become the righteousness of God. You can neither create it nor destroy it. It is energy. And it is an energy that was given to us freely as a result of Yeshua's choice. Whatever Yeshua was at the foundation of the earth, he chose to remove himself from that state to become what he became for us 2,000 years ago. And that affected all of creation from the foundations of the earth. So humble yourselves before God, resist the devil, and he will flee from you. That thought process, that ego trip, all of those things will flee from you. Then it says, come close to God. Well, we already talked about that, right? Where if there's two, if there's a charge moving in the same direction and another charge moving in the same direction, it creates a magnetic field, which creates an attraction force that draws those two together until they become one. And once they are one, there is no difference or there's no understanding between the two that would give them a disharmonic appearance. Come close to God and he will come close to you, right? Come close to God. Draw near to what? Elohim. Draw near to that process of purpose that is either the yod or the head, and it will draw near to you. Law of attraction, right? Wash your hands. Oh, here we go. Teshuvah, right? This is mikvah. Why do you mikvah? You're unclean. Somehow you made yourself unclean. What does that do? Water changes status, right? Wash your hands, you sinners. Person who has committed a sin. Sin, it's a transgression of Torah. So you violated Torah, wash your hands. Purify your hearts through the washing, right? Hearts. For your loyalty is divided between God and the world. The life, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eye. All that were present in the garden when Eve ate the fruit. Is good for, she's pleasing to the eyes, desirable to make one wise, and good for food, right? All right. Now, moving from there, it says, let there be tears for what you have done. Okay, that's the season of repentance. That's right now. You say, oh, I screwed up. Great. Then it says, to be sadness instead of laughter, and gloom instead of joy. Humble yourselves before Yahweh, and he will lift you up into a state of honor. Okay, so of course we're talking about elevation here, but you need to understand the is becoming the vessel of reception. So it's real simple. You take care of the business that's going to occur at Yom Kippur. Then you spend the rest of introspection in a state of reception because something very important is about to occur. A lot of people miss this. There are, again, trends. What's happening here? This is a descendance or a removal of what? Of the physical realm, the answer, as it were, to the question. And then we have what? We have an incline in this area from the golden calf to Yom Teruah. There is a spiritual increase. You have to be in a state of reception for this. So let's talk about that for a minute. Why? What are we doing here? First of all, we're getting rid of the thing that would make us feel like we're not worthy of what we're supposed to be receiving during this season. Right? We are going to spend the next 40 days feeling sorry for what we've done, or we're going to get that taken care of, get it done. Why? Because it's finished. Say, okay, I know that this is going to be a temptation next year, not a judgment. Set the intent to overcome. Stealing, adultery, murder, all of those things that are temptations, you intend next time to overcome. Done. It's taken care of. What's next? Receive. And here's the part that's so powerful. The only way you can receive is to step into that of faith, which is what? Believe that God exists. Okay, what does that mean? That He's the greater, He's the husband. You see, all of this is about what has been made. Marriage is actually a teacher about what's actually occurring in the supernatural realm. The concept of the greater giving to the lesser. That what? Intensify the state of Elohim as the greater giving. Oh man, really understood what I'm talking about when it comes to the husband and wife. Your head would explode. But the premise is in that state of Elohim, in that intensification, that vessel gets filled and expands, right? That's that concept of the baby, right, being conceived and growing in the womb. Now, what's is a concept or an idea that is because there is supposed to be a creation. There's supposed to be something new. In that process, you see, in order to give, there's going to be a necessity for you something else to be the lesser. You need to be taught. But the premise also begins as the idea that the seeing are important. Because if you observe your husband in your mind not being trustworthy, he won't be trustworthy. If you observe your husband as failing at something, he's going to fail at it. Remember, Yahweh said to Adam, because you listened to the voice of your wife. What did Adam do? He sat there with his wife. His wife handed him that apple and he ate it. There was no voice, but there was. And that was her imagination. Her imagination about what Adam would do. Okay? So the premise is that the seeing part, how you humble. You humble yourself, accept that there's a great. That's the easy part. Now what do you got to do? You have reception to observe. The whole idea behind the double slit experiment. The whole idea is that we didn't mean to look, but we looked. And when we looked, it didn't follow the pattern that it was supposed to follow. Right? It followed the pattern that we expected. And over time, they figured out that the detectors were actually honoring what the observers were saying that would happen. It was going to spin up. It would spin up. It's going to spin down. Expectation. So what I need to ask you is, what are you observing and expecting your husband to do? Prosper, cheat, blow up, right? Now, men, there's a do. How do you function within the do of dwelling with your wife with understanding? Because you want your prayers hindered. You do not want that. You don't want to be sitting there crying out to God and nothing come because of the way that you have treated. But the premise is, as we operate within that function, there is a necessity to understand that we're the ones moving the source to receive in order to give, right? We move it, and we move it through compassion, understanding. We move it through compassion. We move it through energy into our bride in order for our bride to activate a purpose. What's that purpose? Well, we have 12 tribes, right? 12 tribes start out from 12 men, sons of Israel, who was one esoteric vision kind of dude, right? The guy saw the correspondence, angels sending and descending. The guy said to God, "You're going to be my God if you protect me and you bless me. And then I'll get then I will make this plan. After you do the deed," right? That's a crazy cat that can say those things. But his sons, right? His 12 sons, 12 disciples. And what was crazy about it is the one thing that was existent within all of it was empathy. When you say, okay, we've got the Ish, we've got the Ishah, we've got the eight, we've got the five. That's between the masculine and feminine. And we keep getting that another time. But for instance, is what is the dissonance? What is the part that doesn't, where we know we know how, but we don't know how to, we don't know what to treat. Right? It's the dissonance, it's the non-harmonic part that exists with the concept or of those two things, the actioning, moving of energy, and the observance. And so the helpmate doesn't become the helpmate through, "Oh, yes, honey, I'll make you a sandwich." That's almost borderline exploitation because you can make yourself a sandwich. And don't get me wrong, she wants to operate within that realm. But you need to be able to in that realm as well. Okay? So the function is, don't sit on the couch and wait for the sandwich, because she doesn't have to make the sandwich. Will she? Yeah, probably. But she can make it as well. If you have the mindset that you can sit on the couch and wait for the sandwich, you are okay. Understand the metaphor there. Please get your mind wrapped around the sandwich. Okay, but now watch this. When and expects the husband to do, so if she expects him to fail, if she thinks in his mind, if she thinks he's not going to do this, he's not making enough money and we're gonna be out on the street. But if you see and observe him being successful, he will be successful and he will provide, he will ensure, and effect. Now, will not be affected. Guess who's not going to come and help you out? Don't get me wrong, this is not static, it's dynamic. But guess who's not going to help you out? The universe. If you can't honor the position of honor, in trying to make up for that. So if you have a husband who's supposed to protect you and you think, I don't really need his protection, either A, you're going to go do something stupid that with his protection, or worse yet, you're going to say, I don't need a man to protect me. Listen, if you have that plumbing, you need a man to protect you. And if you don't, neither will the universe. You're wrong. That's static. That's dynamic. Because there is mercy. Remember, the first action of the perceivable intensification of all power in the universe is the first vessel of reception that receives from the upper world, from the intent of the intensification of all power in the universe. Also, is the filter with any information. So any information that's, oh yeah, she didn't accept instruction from her husband. She didn't accept instruction from her husband, so we're not going to give her instruction. She didn't accept provision from her husband, so we're not going to give her provision. Look at the Proverbs 31 wife. If there's ever any question whether this is some crazy masculine, misogynistic, chauvinistic attitude, what I want you to think about is what's going on with the Proverbs 31 wife. She's a landowner, a business owner. She has cottage industries. Her children are never afraid of poverty or being cold. And her husband is known in the gates because of his honor. And what? She's worthy of praise. She's worthy of praise. This is not barefoot and pregnant making sandwiches for the guy on the couch with the beer. This is the woman who realizes that although the husband brings provision, protection, and instruction, she can prosper in her wisdom. Owner, a cottage industry owner. Merchants come from afar for her product, not his product, her product. So that provision needs to be understood in the way, not that the man needs to bring home the bread. That's not the do. The do is the transfer of energy through what? The sovereignty of the son of Adam. But that's only going to occur if she sees him as successful. She has to look at him with the garments of the king in order to be queen. You see the concept there? So during Teshuvah, rebalance your gender role and rebalance that gender role from the understanding of the intensification of all power in the universe. That is the later that you, even man, male, need to be a vessel of reception in order to give. And you, woman, need to be a vessel of reception in order to give. Now, is there correspondence that is on an equal level? Yep, that's the 8. That's the 5. We don't have to get into that, but I can tell you that it responds to pattern and emotion. Okay? But the function of all of this has to do with her seeing and him doing. And that creates the Yod and the Hey, which is Yah. According to Psalm 68, praise the name of Yahweh. His name is Yah. Or praise the name of God. His name is Yah. Okay? So, let's just recap this a little bit. The bride being the corporate collective conscience, neither male nor female, but the corporate collective conscience of what? Of Israel, is in a state of creating the wedding steps of the feast. Passover, the choosing of the bride, the beautification, the accenting of beauty, and the covering of blemishes, right? To present herself as beautiful before him. Correspond to spring, which is resurrection, right? Which is the premise or the idea that everything becomes beautiful and new. And so she presents herself to him during this feast. Finally, at Shavuot, it says, I want covenant with that girl. I want her with my house. I want her to bear my children. And so he then draws her into the covenant, which she agrees or disagrees with. If she accepts it, she is from that point joined, okay? In the mouth of two or three witnesses, not the state of Colorado, but on the mouth of two or three witnesses, which is what? The two witnesses is the man and the woman, okay? Now, there's people out there hop in this sack and think they're married. You need to understand covenant first. You need to understand what you need to put into place. Now, should there be a formal wedding? Of course. It's beautiful. It's a celebration of covenant. It's a celebration of all these things. Don't think for a second. Listen, you got a body count? Those are all your wives. Okay? Let's make that clear. The difference between wife and concubine is there is a difference between covenant and not covenant. Concubine is friends with benefits, right? But the fact is that if you got you've got wives. Now you may have messed up with those other ones, and that's a whole nother level of reaping and sowing and all kinds of reciprocation that I don't want to get into. But the one you're with right now, you need to understand if you've committed that act, it is time to dwell and do what you're supposed to do. Okay? All of that corresponds to what? To procession in the first place, which we create. Have an oat. We bake bread that is not, I'm sorry, that is leavened, because we want to acknowledge that we're no longer in the bread of affliction. We're no longer in the 50 days of Omer. We're no longer in this state of examination, but we now have identified who we are. And if we've identified who we are and we accept the covenant, then we understand we're going from the willful vessel to the bound vessel, the betrothed, right? Remember, it goes from yakal, willfulness, to keel, prisoner, right? One who is bound, to what? Kalala, which is bride, okay? Or keli, which is vessel, prepared for reception, right? Which we know corresponds to the thing that happens under the sheets in the bedroom, which is why Yom Kippur is called the day. Remember, Ruth said to Boaz, spread your covering. So now you understand how all of this has to do with the masculine and feminine principle, and has to do with what the female principle is supposed to do. If you have that plumbing, here's how your purpose works. And this is what your power is. If you are male, this is what your purpose is. And if it is purpose, then it is enabled. It means that's what your power is. Now, here's the crazy part. Both of those will be born of adversity. Why? Because your adversity becomes your strength becomes your wisdom. And when you have wisdom, you're an expert. Your expertise becomes your purpose. And now you understand why you went through in the first place, so that you can help other people out all the drama that you went through. So now you understand why it is so important during Teshuvah. Get back, get the junk out of the way, get back in the tent, start operating, balancing yourself for the awakening, resurrecting into what? Into everlasting blessing. That word everlasting actually means hidden blessing, or everlasting contempt, hidden contempt. That's in chapter 12. And it says that those who have awakened to the identity of the bride will shine like the sky, right? They will be as bright as the sun. So now we get back to light. We get back to the mind. We get back to not evil. We get back to what? Having to be in a state of humility, but be elevated into a state in which we have the rulership of heaven. But the big question you need to ask, and then we're done. What is heaven if it is something that we're supposed to rule? It was something inside of us. The rulership of heaven exists within you. Seek ye first the rulership of heaven, and all of those other things will be added to you. That is not how we operate. We operate in a very different mindset. Heck, a good percentage of the existence of Torah observant people don't even do the 10% for the feast days. They don't do the 10% for the poor. They don't even do the 10% for the Levite. Okay? So, I know that that was a lot of information, but you understand, I want you to understand the crucialness of this season. I want you to enter the feast days having accepted the pursuance of the feast days. Yom Teruah is pursuing you right now. And you're either going to wake up without oil, or you're going to wake up with oil. And when you wake up with oil, you're going to light that puppy up and you're going to be fine. Okay? So remember what you need to do. You need to square up your account. That's the easy part. The secrets that are within your heart, within you, you don't have to suffer for, you don't have to answer to. Just intend to go through the temptation again and overcome it. It doesn't mean you're gonna, because you got to get to that point. Intend, it's the intention to overcome the temptation. You won't have the judgment. Let me tell you what we do. We feel guilty. We wait until it's time to get bashed up the head. We get bashed up the head, and then we're like, Lord, why do we get bashed up the head? Because the whole part of these days has nothing to do with your sin. You arrive at Yom Kippur with the purity of heart. You've stepped into your purpose, into the reason for you having the yod or the head. And until those two are joined together through the equality of the fire and the of the dissonance between the two, which is what? Knowledge versus do, right? So what is it? You are taught what to expect. The woman is taught to expect from the man. What to expect from a man. Taught how to treat him. Your mother and father never taught you how to treat a man. They taught you what to expect from men because you were a female. Men were taught how to treat women. Your mother and father, your whole life, this is how you treat a girl. This is the girl. Call the girl a girl. And the first instance of expecting, or the first instance of experiencing, can be very overwhelming. But women, if you don't treat them correctly, if you don't learn that, you have to learn from him. See, what you expect, you have to learn from her. You don't learn it from your mother. But you treat him, you have to learn from him. You can to expect from him at the time, but you can know what to do. You don't know how to, you don't know what to expect from him. It results in there being a dissonance. So the fire of passion definitely brings you together, but that creates inequality. But the inequality, purpose, the do versus the observe, and the observer one uber powerful. That's deliberate creation. Deliberate creation of bride, heaven and the new earth. Remember, it says, "Let the spirit and the bride." The bride has to visualize. This is what I'm going to observe happen. Observe it. Even Yeshua said, if you request something, believe you have received it and you will receive. That's a vital process. I think that's enough said on this. Don't feeling sorry for yourself heading up to Yom Kippur. I really hope some Orthodox Jews are watching this because they do some ridiculous stuff for Teshuvah. Get it square. Wait for the reciprocate. The reciprocation's coming. You're going to be tempted with it again. Repented. You have not demonstrated that you're trustworthy in that aspect, right? Get it square, step into your purpose, resurrect into this amazing, beautiful, oil having, lamp carrying amazingness. And if we do it corporately, then we are the bride and we can say, come. And I'm not saying that I want to necessarily get it over with, but all this needs to be in place before there is the new heaven and the new earth, and also before the time of rest, the 1,000th year, or the time in which there is actually a Shabbat on this world. Okay? Okay. For those of you on YouTube, Shabbat Shalom.